My grandmother was no magician, but I've been told it was miraculous how she schooled and fed her children with no job. She did not pull a rabbit out of her hat. She was known to pull strings for her children. To my grandmother, anyone old enough to say, "I'm hungry," was old enough to go to the farm. And I remember we planted maize, veggies, beans, potatoes, even mangoes, avocados. You could have called them the fruits of our work. Farming was a passion rooted in our existence. Our house structure did not say high standard of living, but I'll tell you right now, for fun, we climbed tall fruit trees, and it was our standard of living. I watched a 3-acre farm raise a banker, a pharmacist, an entrepreneur, and I'm not saying farming always brought enough. I'm saying it was pivotal when everything was tough. I learned people need people, and farms do not just feed people. They nourish communities, they feed dreams, they plant realities. I say agriculture, and it's easy to think food on the table, but when I table our needs, you will see agriculture has done way more for the people, held families more than hands, handed a future today even to people who know nothing about plants, but some are paid for their plants. I'm talking drivers, engineers, policymakers, marketers, a chain of jobs, and you are free to think. Where I come from, and I want to say Kenya, but I can also say Africa and still mean to say agriculture is the backbone of our economy, the spine to food security. I want to say it has upheld us, but I can also say it has held us down, a crown on the heads of farmers who cannot be seen in a concrete city. But don't we feel it when the prices are too high? When farmers are going through it, isn't it a survival all through it? Ain't we affected by factors that affect a farmer? And yet it's like we left farming in the hands of a past getting older and older. But age is not what you lose when you let agriculture be an aging sector. When the world is peeling, and when it takes extra skin to take care of your kin, the hunger of those who lack something to eat will not let us sleep in peace. And it's not just mothers. Everyone pays when the youth cannot find a job that pays. So tomorrow is a dream. And agriculture can close the distance between today and a vision. But if only we do something about a sector that has been deemed less appealing to deal in, if only we induce young minds to come into a venture that needs the adventure of innovation, creativity, high energy, I close my eyes. And for millions of young people at the end of a corner, I see agriculture as a way, a chance, a shot to make it out, to make something of themselves, to lead self, to lead for all our sake. So what are we waiting for?
What are we waiting for, indeed, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome. Our greetings first. Governor Fabio Panetta, President Tharman, Giancarlo Giorgetti, Ajay Banga, Christine Lagarde, Madam President, it's an absolute pleasure to invite our dignitaries, our guests, and also it's a pleasure as a former master's student to have master's students from the University of Lewis here as well, our future leaders taking part in today's event. Benvenuti alla Banca d'Italia. My name is Lukwasa Burak. I'm an international news and business anchor, and I'm also African. I was born in Zambia. This is a story that is very close to my heart. So why are we here? You heard Mufasa. He's a poet, but first he is a farmer. And I don't know about you, but the words that I really took away from him was the fact that he mentioned, number one, his mother, and number two, his grandmother. And we all know the role that women play in agriculture on the African continent. So he's got my vote already. But he said, everyone pays when the youth can't find a job that pays. It's not a nation-wide problem. It's not a continent-wide problem. This is going to be a global problem. And why? Well, jobs are the clearest way out of poverty. And across Africa, the demographic momentum is extraordinary. You will hear the statistics shortly from our guests. The talent is there, the ambition is there. Let's face it, Africa is rich in so many ways. So the question for us today is, are the economies ready? Are they structured? Are the processes, is the infrastructure in place to absorb all that talent, but at scale? Jobs don't just appear because we have a beautifully crafted, slick soundbite. They appear when the foundations are there. And we are going to hear about those foundations this afternoon. The World Bank Group's evidence is very clear. No foundation, no investment. No investment, no jobs. No jobs, no hope. It's very simple. So today we've brought people from around the world, from different sectors, and they are here for our one challenge. How do we move from strategy to evidence to practical solutions, from potential to employment? That is our question. Let us begin, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honour to welcome our host here today. He is a gentleman who sits at the heart of financial stability, investment confidence, and of course long-term growth. All are essential for sustainable job creation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our host here today, Governor of the Banca d'Italia, Fabio Panetta.
Mr. President of the Republic of Singapore, Mr. President of the World Bank Group, Madam President of the European Central Bank, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. The world does not face a shortage of young people ready to work. It faces a shortage of jobs ready to absorb them. Over the next decade, around 1.2 billion young people will enter the labor force in developing countries, far outpacing current job creation. Africa alone will host a quarter of the world's youth population by 2050. Scary numbers. Whether this demographic transformation becomes a dividend or a source of instability depends on our ability to create enough jobs. It is, therefore, a pleasure to welcome you to Banca d'Italia for this event, laying the groundwork for jobs in Africa, core infrastructure and business environments, which brings together policymakers, international institutions, and experts to address one of today's most pressing challenges. I wish to thank the Italian government and the World Bank for their leadership in advancing this initiative and for convening this discussion on how to foster sustained employment growth in developing economies. Employment is not only a development priority, it is a cornerstone of economic stability and social cohesion. Over the past 3 decades, globalization has helped reduce poverty by expanding economic opportunities and generating jobs across large parts of the world. Yet, this progress has proven fragile. The pandemic, rising trade disputes, renewed protectionism, and growing geopolitical tensions have added uncertainty to the global economic environment. In some regions, war is no longer a distant threat, but a tragic reality with human costs and, above all, and potentially far-reaching economic consequences. Rapid technological change, particularly artificial intelligence, is now reshaping production and labor demand. It expands market access and raises productivity across the economy, but also creates new challenges. Translating innovation into more and better jobs rather than deeper inequality requires infrastructure, digital skills, access to finance, and credible institutions. Yet, these conditions remain uneven across developing economies. Many low-income countries face severe fiscal constraints. Rising financing needs limit public investment in infrastructure and reinforce the urgency to attract private capital. Unlocking private sector resources at scale depends on creating an environment in which firms can invest, expand, and absorb labor. This ultimately rests on two mutually reinforcing pillars: productive capacity and institutions. First, countries must strengthen the very foundations of growth, notably infrastructure and human capital. In developing economies, the infrastructure financing gap exceeds 4 percentage points of GDP annually, with energy and transport being among the most binding constraints. Second, regulatory quality shapes private sector behavior. Better business regulation stimulates firm entry, investment, and employment growth. These two pillars, infrastructure and regulatory quality, are complementary. Infrastructure investment without regulatory certainty struggles to attract long-term financing. At the same time, regulatory reform without adequate physical and human capital delivers only limited employment gains. Aligning the two is essential for building resilient and inclusive growth. This approach underpins the Mattei Plan, launched by the Italian government to turn potential into economic opportunities in the African continent. Italy is committed to advancing this integrated agenda. The analytical work of the World Bank, including through its Rome hub, which is enthusiastically, dear Ajay, supported by Banca d'Italia, provides a rigorous empirical foundation for identifying high-impact reforms. Equally important are the contributions of policymakers, business leaders, and academics in identifying the constraints and translating analysis into action. In this respect, earlier today, we hosted the World Bank's High-Level Advisory Council on Jobs. Let me conclude by welcoming our distinguished keynote speakers. We will begin with Tharman Shanmugaratnam, President of the Republic of Singapore, followed by Ajay Banga, President of the World Bank Group. Giorgia Meloni, Prime Minister of Italy, will intervene later this afternoon. Their perspectives will help frame the discussion on how infrastructure, skills, and regulatory quality can support employment-intensive growth. I thank you for your attention and wish you a constructive discussion.
Governor Panetta, thank you very much indeed. And now we're going to hear from a gentleman whose perspective on jobs is grounded not just in global economics, it's actually in lived experience, a fascinating story actually, and also something fundamental, human capital. Speaking recently, he said something that really struck me because it's so often overlooked when it comes to the human experience and being jobless, unemployed. He said, "This is a crisis of hope, of self-belief, and of dignity. And this is a crisis of solidarity." Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President of the Republic of Singapore, His Excellency Tharman Shanmugaratnam.
Governor Fabio Panetta, Minister Giancarlo Giorgetti, President Ajay Banga, President Christine Lagarde, President Sidi, and everyone else who's here. Thank you for having me. I'll make a few remarks to follow on from Fabio's excellent introduction. First, let me just say that the odds are against us. The odds are against us. The odds of us succeeding in this challenge of job creation in Africa and the developing world are now against us. And overcoming these odds is going to require a step change in public policy, in development finance, and in public-private collaboration. I should say public, private, and civil society collaboration. It's going to require something quite new in our development efforts. The reason for the odds being against us is that there has been a step change in the environment, which we are all familiar with. There is a step change in the global trading environment, and I'm referring not so much to the tariffs and the like, but the fact that the rules are no longer being observed. That's the more profound change in the global trading system. That rules and norms that took 35 years, in fact longer than 35 years, to build up, never perfect, not always enforced, not always observed, but they held world trade together. They offered small, medium, and large-sized countries a predictable framework within which we could trade with each other and we could exploit what we called our comparative advantage. Those rules have been dealt a body blow, and that is a step change in the system. A second step change in the system is technology. It is too early to say whether AI and other advanced technologies will have more of a displacement effect on employment than they will have the effect of creating new jobs and augmenting existing jobs. It's too early to say, particularly in the developed world. But the odds here again are not in our favor in the developing world, in sub-Saharan Africa, in South Asia, in some other parts of the developing world, because it is precisely the more routine and replicable tasks that are the most easily automated. This was true even before AI, but we're now seeing an acceleration of this disruptive technological force. And it will apply not just to routine white-collar jobs, but also to factory jobs and the like, because low-cost automation is now a force, with China having been the leading innovator in embedding AI into robotics and other automation technologies, and being able to produce what were previously thought of as relatively simple consumer goods that required labor-intensive production, now using machines. That's a step change as well. So, in order to address this fundamentally new environment, we need a step change in the way we go about development, in the way in which we collectively support development. And we have to do this because if we look at the demographics in Africa, 1.2 billion young people entering the workforce within the next decade, to bend the arc of human well-being globally, we must succeed in Africa. We must succeed in Africa. And therefore, creating jobs in Africa and mobilizing development finance and development assistance and all the technical support required is in furtherance of what is truly a global common good. It's not just about Africa. And I believe we can do so. I believe we can succeed in Africa, even against these odds, but it's going to require the step changes that I spoke about. First, there's some things which we know how to do that have to be done much more boldly and with much greater urgency, and that is schooling systems and skilling systems. I don't need to elaborate about it. We more or less know what to do, but we need to invest in it. And this has to be a task of governments with some revenue-raising responsibilities, but not too much, because education is not a huge cost. And it requires also the international development community, the World Bank, and everyone else to come into to get into this game of upping standards, keeping the girls in school, having the transition to skills-based training and skills-based employment. It can be done. It's been done in some other parts of the world, and this is not unique to any culture or any geography. It can be done. Second, which the World Bank is now very seriously embarked on together with the African Development Bank and others, is we've got to invest much more boldly in broadband and electricity. Those are the two biggest gaps in Africa, broadband and electricity. Again, it can be done. And some of it will be powered by solar, some of it will be powered by conventional fuels, but we've got to treat this as a matter of urgency. Again, doable. Third, we've got to invest in the logistics and systems, hardware and software, to make the African continental free trade area a reality. Looked at from a distance, I will say it is far too slow off the mark. It was mooted and agreed to several years ago, and is moving too slowly. But it can be done. And in a world where global markets are no longer as open or as certain as they used to be, they're still there, but I would say it's not as propitious an environment compared to what East Asia had 50 years ago. We've got to make the most of the African continent, the growing middle class, the growing lower middle class even. It's a huge potential market, but it requires logistics, connectivity, and cross-border enterprise. And that too requires investment. Fourth, we've got to tap on the job-creating opportunities in some sectors which are generally neglected in other parts of the world, but which have a very interesting jobs multiplier in Africa. And it will interest you to know that a dollar spent or $1 million spent in renewable energy creates 3 times as many jobs as in fossil fuels, and $1 million spent in the agri-food business creates many more jobs than manufacturing and services. It doesn't mean we do only that, but it means that this is where the multiplier, this is where the bang for the buck is the largest. And it also meets a need, because the transition towards clean energy is a global challenge. And Africa has advantages because it does have the sun, it does in many parts of Africa have the wind, and it does have the hydro. It's a comparative advantage, but it's a job creator. And we have to think of it in those terms. Likewise, agri-food. Africa has 70% of the world's available arable land, 70%. And food demand is one source of demand that one can very confidently say is growing exponentially, partly as a result of population growth, partly as a result of people rising up from being poor to lower middle income and to become middle income. Food demand in Africa and globally is growing, and it's a real opportunity for Africa. But we have to address a fundamental structural inadequacy in agriculture in Africa, which is that most jobs in Africa in agriculture are on the farm. Whereas if you look, in fact, it's 70% of jobs in the agri-food industry is in the farm in Africa, in relatively low productivity activity. If you look at the Americas, if you look at Europe, it's about 30%, let's say about a third. A third of the jobs on the farm are in the farm, and the rest of the jobs are upstream, seeds, fertilizers, machinery, downstream, aggregators, processing, marketing, logistics. Those are good jobs. So that's why you have this job multiplier in agri-food. It's upstream, on the farm in primary agriculture, and downstream. A huge opportunity. So I'm basically optimistic. If we make these step changes in public policy, in development finance, which we are well embarked on already, in terms of mobilizing a lot more private finance for what will be profitable opportunities, and in the way we just organize ourselves around the world to recognize this as a global common good, and why We can't afford to fail because we will all pay for it. So I'm glad that this initiative has been launched by the Mattei Plan and supported very actively by the World Bank Group, African Development Bank. And thank you very much once again, Fabio, for hosting us. But there's room for optimism even as the odds are against us. Thank you very much.
President Tharman, thank you very much indeed. So how do we translate and go from partnership to concrete outcomes? Well, our next speaker has made job creation a central mission of the bank's work. And since taking office, sorry, I've got my heels stuck in the shoe, in the stage. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, my goodness. We've all been there. We've all been there. Okay. President Ajay Banga, please come to my rescue. We're about to hear about the 3 pillars and the foundations to job creation. There's a hole there, ladies. Be careful.
Always the gentleman ready for the rescue. I tell you, the real cause for optimism is I've never heard President Tharman Shanmugaratnam said so correctly so many times in one audience, which is pretty cool, right? The names were perfectly pronounced. First of all the jokes aside, I want to start by thanking the Italian government because I think that we can all talk about jobs and we can talk about the desire to change them. You need governments that are going to make a difference with the actions they take. And I think what Prime Minister Meloni is doing and the Mattei Plan and the government are doing is showing that they're putting their money where their mouth is, where their thinking is, and they're adding their technology, their capability and Italian companies into the mix. And I think that's a great starting point. And Fabio, I think you're an outstanding host, but also a terrific governor for the World Bank. And I want to thank you as well for what you're doing. President Tharman is a friend, a mentor, but also, as you just heard, a very, very constructive leader in the world. He's thoughtful, he's deep, he's realistic, but most importantly, he has hands-on experience through many years of public service, not just as being elected as a legislator, but through public service in government in many different roles. It shows by the way he speaks, and his willingness to be the guide and advisor for our Jobs Council is a huge asset for me personally, but also for the bank. And then my soul sister is here, and that's Christine. And she and I think alike on many of these topics, so I'm just delighted that she's around and being with us. And we had a great lunch together as well, and did talk a great deal about AI. And for all of you else who are here, CD, Alvaro, I'm delighted you're all here together with us. Here's the thing, a lot of people have given these numbers, but yes, over the next 10 to 15 years, 1.2 billion young people are going to come of age. They're going to come of age, meaning they will be 18 years of age, and they will be looking for a job. Now, we call that a demographic dividend, and I think it is true if you give them clean air, clean water, healthcare, and education when they're growing up. What you really need to do is to give them the hope, the dignity, the optimism of being able to earn money because of being a productive contributor to society. Whether that is by working for somebody or whether that is by starting your own business and being an entrepreneur does not matter. The point is, it's the dignity and the hope and the optimism that brings you out of your bed every morning wanting to be something better for the world that day. And that's what we're talking about. Because right now, the same emerging markets where these 1.2 billion are growing, remember we're not discussing the developed world right now. That's a whole other thing because the population dynamics there are quite the opposite. And in parts of the emerging world as well, the population dynamic is changing. But overall, 1.2 billion people in the emerging world will come of age. Those same countries are currently forecast to create around 400 million jobs. Now, those forecasts are made by, I'm in a room full of economists, so pardon me, I'm a recovering economist too, but the forecasts are made by economists. We do tend to make assumptions go beyond where they should, so we may be wrong. And we may be wrong by 50%, even 100%. So fine, so instead of 800 million, it'll be 400 million people who will not have a job at the end of 15 years. It's still too many zeros attached to those numbers. That's the point I'm trying to make. Don't get hung up on the number, get hung up on the micro problem of these people growing up without hope. That's the issue we've got. And by 2050, more than 80% of the world's population will live in today's developing countries. And just to be clear, 1 in 4 people on the planet will be African. Now, if these young people do not find work, then the current pressures we fear of migration, of fragility, of political systems, I think they are not going to remain contained within borders. But on the other hand, if they do, then this demographic shift will probably fuel growth for the coming 30 to 40 years, the way Asia did over the last 20 to 30 years. And so this is not a zero-sum game. When developing countries grow, advanced economies benefit, and Prime Minister Meloni, President Tharman, they know this very well. Rising incomes create new consumers, they create new markets, they create new partners. Supply chains will diversify, stability will strengthen, and at the World Bank Group, what we are trying to do is move our entire North Star towards jobs, move our concentration, our focus around this idea of jobs, because jobs are the surest way out of poverty. If you want to put a nail in the coffin of poverty, give a person a job. That is the way to do it. We have put particular emphasis and focus on entrepreneurs. We are very focused on small and medium-sized businesses. The reality is small and medium-sized businesses create 90% of employment globally, including in Italy and including in the United States and including in China. And so they don't survive without big businesses. It's a symbiotic relationship, but we've got to make it easier for them to set up business and grow and get capital and do the things they need to do for the people they want to employ. So our approach settles on 3 pillars, and Fabio talked about pillars. The first one is infrastructure, the physical and the human. And by physical and human, I mean, of course, energy, transport, water, and digital connectivity and power like the M300 effort, but also importantly, financial systems and payment systems. It's very important. People forget that as part of the infrastructure. You should not. You're sitting in a central bank. It is the most important thing we can do to facilitate commerce and business. Second is the human side of this, healthcare, education, and most importantly, skilling in a world where it's unclear what dimensions of traditional education will contribute greater to your competitive benefit. But skilling and matching the skills to the opportunities that are coming will certainly be a good way for you to have a productive outcome. And so that's going to be important. That's the first pillar. The second pillar is business-friendly regulatory environments. So in our private sector lab, which we'd set up, when we were asking what is it that will enable more private sector money to come to the party for the emerging markets, 1, 2, and 3 was a predictable regulatory environment, a level playing field. It was what the words they use, the rules, the predictability that investors require and seek. The third pillar is to help the private sector scale using de-risking tools and guarantees and equity that moves investments at volume. So I think Italy's Mattei Plan, our jobs first strategy, we align across all 3. I'm going to give you a few specific examples. We're expanding physical infrastructure, electrical connections in Mozambique and Cote d'Ivoire in Tanzania, in the DRC, water and irrigation systems in Angola, in Tanzania. Just a couple of examples. Then in human infrastructure, we're linking labor demand with opportunity across borders, connecting jobs in Europe with skilling and talent in North Africa, beginning in Tunisia, expanding to Egypt and Ethiopia. We are also advancing regulatory reform, clearing the bottlenecks that come in the way, that jam the system, that hold back investment, that pair financing with practical policy change. And a good example is the work underway to strengthen energy connectivity between Tunisia and Italy, thereby creating a more predictable and a clearer framework to link Africa and Europe. And then finally, the third pillar, mobilizing private capital through concessional finance and guarantees, making public resources stretch further. We've already got €1 billion in co-financing moving alongside the World Bank Group. We're talking to a number of institutions, including CDB, on what more we can do together. So this 3-pillar approach, this partnership with governments like Italy, comes to life in 5 sectors, which are very carefully chosen. They are large-scale. Local job creation can take root. They don't rely on outsourcing Western jobs based on cost arbitrage. That model is challenged for all kinds of reasons, including the ones that the President of Singapore started speaking about. Secondly, these are not as sort of headwind facing from what AI may mean for jobs in the next 5 to 10 years. A number of them actually, small AI delivered at the edge, even on old phones, using local compute power, could actually be a productivity enhancer in these 5 sectors. Not equally, but it could. And second, and the last point is that they build opportunity where people live. So what are these? The first is infrastructure itself, energy and other things. The construction, but then what it enables. The second is agribusiness, and you saw the video and you heard the President of Singapore speak very eloquently about the upstream and the downstream impacts of the multiplier effect of agriculture as a business, particularly by giving small farmers, which is the majority of our farming community, the access to scale that they deserve to remain competitive and productive. Third is healthcare. A lot of us in the developed world take healthcare for granted. In the developing world, it is a very serious challenge. If you try and build healthcare only by building hospitals, you're facing a losing battle. You have to build out primary healthcare at the grassroots level to catch diseases and provide healthcare well before things get out of hand. The diseases of prosperity, that is not a fair word, but the diseases of heart attacks, diabetes, blood pressure, strokes caused by new food habits and sedentary lifestyles, which connect a little bit, unfortunately, to prosperity. These are diseases that can be diagnosed earlier and caught and treated much cheaper than when you go to the hospital. The most expensive type of healthcare is hospital. And we have to figure out how to get ahead of this through primary healthcare, better delivered. And then tourism. And a lot of people, you're in Italy, a mecca for tourism. And I was in Cairo yesterday, a real possibility on tourism even beyond what they do. Tourism generates more jobs per dollar invested than any other sector that you can think of, both direct and indirect, for exactly the same kinds of reasons that the President of Singapore spoke about when he spoke about agriculture. And then value-added manufacturing, including the critical minerals that we all seek from the emerging markets who are blessed with them. So there is a unique point of time now where these 5 sectors could come together, whether as a job or as an entrepreneur, differently impacted by small AI delivered at the edge as compared to big AI, but a real possibility. I was in Egypt and Cairo for the last 2 or 3 days. I saw this in action across 4 of these 5 sectors. I visited a bus manufacturing facility, e-buses, supported through policy reforms and financing. It's expanding local production. It's creating skilled industrial jobs and export opportunities. I visited a housing program, not only building resilient homes, but supporting construction supply chains and employment. I have visited with agri-tech entrepreneurs that are helping small farmers improve productivity, connect to export markets, create jobs along the value chain from storage to logistics to processing. And I toured the newly constructed Grand Egyptian Museum, which is amazing, that is responsible single-handedly for driving up tourism numbers in the country of Egypt and is generating employment opportunities far beyond its exhibit halls. For those of you who know Egypt, it is not just the country of pharaohs, which is what people are selling today. It has the white desert, which is stunning, where even Egyptians have not been. It has the sea and the beaches and the life that a lot of us desire in holidays. It has unbelievable food, very warm, welcoming people, an outstanding culture, and things that all of us would love to spend time with. It's why we come to Italy on holiday. Egypt has that too. But yet, Egypt gets a total of 15 million tourists in a year. New York City gets 64 million. So we are talking about a pimple on a dimple on an ant's left cheek. This is what we should be thinking about when we think of tourism and the power of tourism. So I think that's my case on tourism that I made to the Egyptian president as well, exactly that way. Now, in each of these cases, infrastructure mattered, but access to finance mattered even more. Egypt also demonstrates something else. If you plan regulatory reforms, if you implement them fully, if you apply them fairly and consistently, you can increase private capital mobilization. They're a journey on, it's not a journey they've completed. They still have too much state-owned enterprises in their economy. It's things they're conscious of, but this is real work opportunity in Egypt. So, the focus of today's summit is to make it easier to do business in one particular sector, agribusiness. It is critical. Jobs are created when entrepreneurs and firms of all sizes, large, small, and micro, have the confidence to start, to hire, to expand. That confidence is built on clarity, on rules that are transparent and reliable. The evidence across time is clear. Countries that have sustained growth and expanded employment have done so not through isolated projects, but through steady, measurable improvements in their business environment. Reforms are sequenced, they are implemented, they are maintained, and they're jealously guarded by the leadership of the country. If we get this right, if we align infrastructure, regulatory certainty, and access to scale and finance, we will create jobs where young people live, and that is why we are here today, because of young people. Thank you very much.
President Banga, thank you very much indeed. President, of course, of the World Bank Group. So, the big question now is that we know the political case, we know the strategic case. What does the evidence show us? As a journalist, that is one of the things we will always ask. What is the evidence showing us? And the gentleman with all of that data to hand, because this is what people want these days. They want the data. If you're going to get more budget, we need to see the evidence. Mr. Paschal Donohoe is the Managing Director, but also the Chief Knowledge Officer for the World Bank Group, and he is going to lay it all out for us. Mr. Donohoe.
Thank you. President Tharman, Ajay, President Banga, Governor Panetta, President Lagarde, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great privilege to be with you all here this afternoon to speak on behalf of the World Bank Group regarding the data, regarding the evidence that can deliver against the job needs that this conference and this afternoon is focused on. And the poet farmer who opened up this conference concluded with a question that should ring in our ears. And the question that he concluded with is, what are we waiting for? What are we waiting for? What are those who are looking for a job, those who are looking for a hope, those who are looking for a path to prosperity in their communities in Africa, what are they waiting for? And the aim of this presentation is, in a few short slides, to take you through that at least part of what we are able to supply to them to end that wait is policies that we know can make a difference. Policies that can lead to the creation of more jobs, policies that will lead to more hope. And in Ajay's presentation, he talked about the 5 sectors, and here in particular, I'm going to be focusing on farming, and he talked about the 3 different policy areas that can lead to job creation in an economy, and specifically in the areas that we are speaking to. So in the presentation that I'm going to share with you, I'm going to open up with a recap as to what those 3 areas of policies are. I will then take you through the evidence for one of those areas alone, for what it can mean for the economy, for the people of Africa, and then I'll conclude with what this means for farming, what it has already meant for food, and then the work that the World Bank Group is doing with many partners here in this room. And of course, being here, I have to recognise the exceptional leadership and contribution of the government of Italy in this area to delivering against those goals. So it's at this point, thank God, there we go. I thought for one moment, and indeed maybe for one moment, a different presentation was up, but the presentation that I need is right here. So this presentation again recaps us through what are those 3 areas of policy intervention that we know will make a difference to the creation of jobs. They've already outlined the 3 pillars that we know can work. They rest on the foundation of macroeconomic stability, of the rule of law, of predictability. They point to the progress that we know we need to make with regard to infrastructure, to the physical and human foundations with regard to energy and water. It points to the second pillar of the importance of business-friendly regulations and how changes in this area will lead to more jobs. And thirdly then, it points to the importance of private capital, of the private sector scaling up to provide the capital within the regulatory environment within which jobs will be delivered. And this matters so much because the vast majority of the jobs that we need to see created will be delivered by the private sector. It will be delivered by our entrepreneurs. It will be delivered by those who set up a business, who grow a business, delivered by those who can scale up a business to make us a larger employer. And here in this particular presentation, I'm going to focus on the middle of those three pillars, the importance of regulation and the difference that it can make. So in the research that we've done in the World Bank Group, what we have done is analysed thousands of different regulations to look at the ones that, if they are changed, if they are improved, make a difference to the delivery of more jobs, make a difference to the delivery of that hope. And from the research that we have done, in looking at the impact of those jobs, what we've done is identify the set of reforms that, when made, for companies and entrepreneurs of different sizes, make a difference to their ability to create a job, keep a job, and to add jobs to companies that already exist. We know that for a micro-entrepreneur, for somebody at the very start of their business journey, that changes with regard to registration, changes with regard to the access of credit, can make such a difference to their ability to create a job. We know that for firms and for employers that are at the level above that, that are on their way towards a higher level of growth, but are still small firms, that changes that are made with regard to licensing, with regard to land rights, with regard to the flexibility of the regulation of fintech, again can enable those particular employers to create and keep more jobs. And finally, we've looked at employers that are a level above that, those employers that are medium-sized, that are on their way to growth, also employers that are looking at how they can deliver additional growth, have the ability to do it. That different changes for them make a difference to their ability to deliver those jobs. Those relate to regulation with regard to investment. It refers to the impact of public procurement. It looks at the standards that need to be clear and predictable with regard to the export of goods and services. But taking that a step further, what we're now going to do is, in the area of regulation, look at what the data and evidence tells us. Tells us about the impact that changes can have on the ability for that job to happen. And what this slide here, through a report that the World Bank Group delivers, called the Be Ready report, that looks at the business regulatory environment of all the economies that we serve. We look at the quality of that environment. We look at how it is set up. And what you can see there in that report is, by use of an index, you can see that particularly for those economies within Africa, the opportunity is there for the quality and nature of their regulation to be changed, and changed in a way over time that is capable of delivering more jobs. We look at there what it means for the economies of North Africa, what it means for the governments and for the economies of sub-Saharan Africa, and you can see the opportunity with regard to regulation. So why do we talk about this being important? And the reason is, from the research that we have available and have done, is that changes when it comes to regulation make a direct and measurable impact to the average income of those in those jobs. And we know that as the income of those jobs grow, these are good jobs, they're good jobs that pay well, they're jobs that we have the ability to keep and create more of in the future. And for example, in this slide, what we've done is modelled and looked at the evidence regarding how changes in licensing, registering a business, changes with regard to the availability and use of work permits, what does this mean for the availability and creation of jobs, by looking at what happens with average income per capita. And what you can see here again is that the opportunity that is there for economies in sub-Saharan Africa, economies located throughout Africa, in North Africa, that if changes are made in the number of days it takes to license a business, you can see how the average income per person within that economy is capable of growing. And that's a recipe for good jobs. It's a recipe for jobs being created. We can see the same message again when, again, looking at our three different sectors that make a difference to how jobs are created, looking at regulation, and then looking at the particular issue of how we want to change barriers to firms being created, to them being set up. If those barriers are changed, what again does that mean to the performance of markets, and more importantly here, to income growth, to jobs being created? And again, you can see the scale of opportunity that is here. This is growth in average income again per capita. You can see for sub-Saharan Africa, you can see for North Africa, the scale of opportunity that is there for incomes to grow, for jobs to be created. The same message again exists with regard to more flexible financial regulations. What this again means for medium-sized and small businesses to access credit, and in turn the opportunity that is there for income per head to grow in Africa as a result of these changes being made. And then finally, if we look at customs and registration, if we look at the standards that are involved in goods being shipped across an economy, in goods being shipped out of an economy, again, you can see clearly here that if changes are made with regard to how much time it takes for trade to leave an economy, to be exported, what this means then for income levels within African economies. And we can see very clearly here, looking at regulation, how changes, if they are made, that make that regulation more business-friendly and adoptable, what this means for average income and what it can mean for jobs. So we bring this back down to the third part of what I've discussed. And I'm using here an example here within Peru in relation to farming, and a very clear story of changes that were made that had a very big impact on the performance of the Peruvian economy with regard to the export of avocados. And a key piece of information behind this is no taxation changes were made here. No changes were made that involved additional cost. To go back to the message of the presentation, it's about changes that are made in regulation, changes that are made in the policy environment. And in each of the areas that I've touched on, we saw changes being made. We saw cooperatives being set up to facilitate the scaling up of entrepreneurial and farming activity. We saw clarification with regard to property rights to ensure there was clarity exactly regarding who owned what. We saw the necessary phytosanitary standards being put in place to deliver confidence with regard to produce. And then we saw dialogue between the public and private sector to look at those regulations and how they can be changed. And the message was clear. The impact was clear. Growth in this economy, growth in the competitiveness of this economy, and the role they had in an important area of food exports. And that message carries through then to where we are with regard to agriculture particularly with regard to Africa. When I talk about AgriConnect, I talk about a mission whose objective is to ensure that 300 million farmers can move from subsistence to surplus. 300 million people and more who will be affected by that. That is one of our core initiatives that we are working on within the World Bank Group. And what we are looking at is the policy interventions that we want to scale up in different areas with regard to aggregation, skills, financing, physical infrastructure, and then the role of agtech that will make a difference to those 300 million farmers, to their communities, to their families, to those who depend upon them. But the heart of that is policy reform. The heart of it is, out of the 3 sectors that we've identified, with a particular focus on changes in policy, working with our partners, the difference that we can make. And I'll end on that note of difference. I talked about the poet farmer who said, what are we waiting for? We're waiting for solutions that have the evidence of working. And behind every one farmer, every one job that we talk about creating is a human story, dignity that we have the opportunity to build. Ajay talked about the need for hope. He talked about the difference that dignity can make if you have a job. Well, we are in the hope business. We're in the business of providing that hope, and of providing that hope with solutions and policies that we know work. So we want to thank all of you here this afternoon who, by your attendance, are showing your support for us, but far more importantly, by your work and by the partnership that this summit here this afternoon symbolises, will make a difference to the delivery of those jobs and make a difference to the delivery and creation of that hope. Thank you. There we go. Thank you very much.
Paschal. Paschal, thank you very much indeed. Okay, so we've heard the words. Let's see what this looks like on the ground. So in targeting the 2 pillars, we are going to be focused on 2 sectors, agriculture and energy. So what does living on the African continent with a system that does not enable you to get the best out of your agricultural land look like? Well, this is the story from Nigeria.
kafin wannan lokaci gaskiya muna dan samun matsalolin ruwa suna ba mu wahala, amma yanzu wannan aikin da aka yi gaskiya alhamdulillah mun samu ruwa sosai da ya kamata. Wannan abin da muke yanzu tumatir za mu dasa, kuma ga shinkafa nan a tsaye, in an kwambe muna so wannan shinkafar tana gama muna yanke ta, alkama kuma muke so mu sa wani guri.
wajen hekta 22 da muke da shi, amma yanzu 15 ya karu. Mun samu karuwa ba karami ba. Yaranmu da suke makaranta mun samu kuɗin da muka biya musu, yaranmu duk sun yi ilimi, suna kan yin ma ilimin.
Wannan project da na Trimin ya taimakawa manoma da ma waɗanda suke zaune a wannan yanki ba manoma ba. Manoma ya taimaka musu tun da dukkanin hanyoyin ruwa da suke kai ruwa gonaki an gyara su, kuma waɗanda suke zaune a gurin kuma hanyoyin duk da suke cikin wannan project ya gyara su. Saboda haka sakamakon wannan aiki rayuwa ta gyaru, an sami ƙarin arziki.
Abin da muke samu ne yanzu gaskiya ya fi na da, tunda da aika daya ana samun kamar 15 haka zuwa 20, amma yanzu Allah ya taimake mu muna samun kamar 30 a aika daya ko 35 haka.
Agriculture on the land, on the ground, and what it means to those who are living, that is their living experience. The challenge then for this particular sector is to take it from small scale, out of informal. We know that agriculture is the backbone of so many countries. It is the backbone of the African continent. So how do we achieve this? This is one of our pillars. And a lot of this is to do with regulation and the confidence, investor, business confidence. So let's discuss this. I've got a fantastic panel with me today. First to join me is the Honourable Eric Opoku, Ghana's Minister for Food and Agriculture, and he leads the Feed Ghana programme, working at the front line of agricultural transformation and focused on boosting productivity, strengthening value chain, but also expanding market access for farmers. Next, Alvaro Lario, President of the International Fund for Agricultural Development, and this is an organisation, and he is working at the intersection of governments, farmers and markets, and tackling one of agribusiness's toughest challenges. And finally, we have Dennis Minev, the CEO of Bemol, a major retail financial services and renewable energy group working in the Brazilian Amazon. And this is a region where commercial viability, employment and environmental constraints collide in what is some of the world's most challenging environments to do business. So excuse me whilst I walk across, but thank you very much for joining us on this panel. And Minister, I'm going to begin with you, if I could, please. You are very happy to say that your country is blessed. I heard this in an interview recently. Your country, my country is blessed, you said. It has the potential, it has the arable land, it has irrigable land as well. But out of 1.9 million hectares, only 229 hectares are being farmed. That is astounding. So, with the Feed Ghana programme, how are you moving farmers from informal and subsistence to more sustained and into productive jobs? How have you done that, and are you there yet?
Yeah. Thank you very much for this all-important question. Let me say that Ghana's agri-food system contributes nearly 30% of our GDP and employs roughly 44% of our workforce, with significant majority of rural households engaged in farming. For many years, agriculture functioned primarily as a low productivity, informal, and smallholder-dominated activity. If agriculture is to generate sustained productive jobs, especially for the 160,000 Ghanaian youth entering the labor market every year, it must be transitioned from smallholder dominance to a model that integrates large-scale production with aggregation and value addition. It is against this background that the government of Ghana has launched what we call Agriculture for Economic Transformation Agenda to modernize agriculture and spur industrialization. And to operationalize this agenda, we are implementing what we call the Feed Ghana program. The Feed Ghana program is to produce food in sufficient quantities to feed the Ghanaian people. We are also implementing what we call the Feed the Industry program to produce agricultural raw materials in sufficient quantities for sustainable industrial operations. And we have also launched what we call the 24-hour economic policy, which, among other things, is to create the demand for agricultural raw materials for processing.
How's it all going?
Hello?
How is the project going?
Good. I will come to that. I'm just laying the foundation and then mount the superstructure on that. We have to lay a solid foundation so that when you mount the superstructure, it will be a perfect one. Now, the strategy is simple. When farmers see available demand, they invest more because every rational producer produces in anticipation of demand. And when processors see available supply, they expand. it is the two that creates the situation where employment multiplies. And so we are moving from farming as a livelihood support to farming as enterprise and agribusiness development. We are currently forging a strong and symbiotic relationship between agriculture and industry to unlock the full potentials of the sector. But we understand that every job created in primary production can create 3 or more additional jobs along the very chain, if and only if the systems function efficiently. And so we are working on the systems. That comes to the question as to what are we doing. Now we want to lay a solid infrastructure as a foundation for agricultural transformation. And so we have launched a program called Irrigation for Wealth Creation. We are now moving Ghana's agriculture from rain-fed agriculture to irrigation agriculture, so that our farmers can be in business all year round to produce sustainably, to sustain industries that are adding value. And that is how we can create the jobs. Then again, we are also constructing agricultural roads. In our 2026 budget, the World Bank is supporting Ghana to construct 1,000 kilometers of agricultural roads. Our hope is that if we are able to fix that challenge, cost of transporting the food will be reduced, and then we can also minimize food losses. Then we are also using the storage and then the warehousing system. We have established what we call the National Food Buffer Stock. The National Food Buffer Stock stepped into the market when farmers are produced in abundance. They mop up the excess, store them, and then release to the market in the lean season. So in the peak season, they protect the interests of the farmers, and then in the lean season, they protect the interests of the consumers. Then we are also setting up what we call the Farmer Center. The Farmer Center in all the agricultural districts. The Farmer Center is just like a center where farmers can go and then access agricultural mechanization. We are providing the tractors, the combine harvesters, and the equipment that the smallholder farmer on his own cannot acquire. We make it available. And the farmers can go to the center, whether they have money or they don't have money, they can access this equipment to enable them expand their farming activities. In the centers, we are going to provide improved seeds, we are providing improved fertilizers, extension, advisory services, and we are going to deploy digital tools from these farmer centers. Let me indicate that the first of the centers will be launched on 21st of this month by His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Ghana. These are some of the things we are doing to secure solid infrastructure for agricultural transformation. But we are also looking at how we can de-risk agricultural finance, because that is very critical.
I'm going to stop there because I want to come to that, and I don't want to lose your message. So please, just hold that for me. I want to fit it into the conversation.
Okay.
But in the meantime, Alvaro, can I come to you, please? Because I'm interested in the reforms. We've heard a lot there from the Minister of what they're doing, and obviously still waiting for results to come back. But when it comes to reforms in helping to move smallholders and making the system more formal and create jobs and scaling it, what actually works in your experience?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having us. First of all, I'd like to thank Italy, I think, for putting together a long-term commercially, I would say, vision of a mutual vision growth with Africa, which I think is very important. Also to Ajay for bringing first energy, then food security and agriculture, and then also water as key elements. And I think they all fit very well together into what we're talking about, infrastructure. I think President Tharman very clearly mentioned something that is fundamental. We're seeing every year 10 million young people from Africa coming into the job market. So let's not only talk about on-farm jobs and production or productivity, but also, and we heard the minister, about storage, about distribution, about export, about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. That's where the high-value jobs can really be created, and I think that's where we should be focusing on. We have in the room a lot of very good partners, obviously Italy, where we're working with the Mattei Plan in Senegal, with Bonifica Ferrarese, and I'll talk a little bit about examples of what we are seeing working with the private sector. Because when we talk about the private sector, we always hear about how we can mobilize, but when I talk to them or to the CEOs, they are talking about demand, about reliability, about quality. Those are the words that we should be bringing into this type of value chain. We have obviously a very good partnership with the World Bank on AgriConnect, with African Development Bank on special agri-processing zones in Africa, with Equity Bank also on bringing climate adaptation to small-scale farmers. So I think all of these partnerships really speak to what can make things happen. But let me perhaps briefly answer to your question. I think in order to make a really value chains investable, what we should be focusing on is on creating, as we are doing in Senegal with Italy and with Bonifica Ferrarese, I would say the infrastructure on roads, on irrigation, on storage, that then make these private sector investments viable. And we're talking about 10,000 hectares, 250 million. More of those partnerships is that what we want to make sure that we're having. So market value chains that are investable. And I think to make them investable, all of these elements around regulation, but also infrastructure, energy are fundamental. In terms of how to also position producers as commercial partners, and that's my second point. I think we know about public-private partnerships, but for us it's public-private producer partnerships. I think of takers, making sure that how they come together, obviously cooperatives was mentioned as one of the ways of organizing and making sure that transactions costs are coming down, and that we're talking about economies of scale is another of the ways of making this type of partnership happen. If we want to really connect the global value chains with the local value chains, as we're doing, for example, with some Japanese companies through some of the G7 initiatives with Marubeni, with UCC on Tanzania-specific value chains on coffee, on cocoa, we really need to make sure that the elements of the risking come into the play, but also capacity building. So I think it's important to talk about jobs in local value chains and how we can connect them to those global. And for that, you need the scale many times through cooperatives. And let me perhaps finalize. Once you have that structure, and I think this is very important, where we're talking about the environment or the organizational structure around producers and around cooperatives, the next thing is financing. And we know, for example, there's a lot of NDBs that are trying to transition their model to make sure, and I think also the World Bank especially, on not just focusing on the trade finance of commercial agri traders, but also to come down to the small-scale farmers, and that's a very different ball game. So I think it's very welcome to work with local financial institutions, whether it's Equity Bank or others in Africa, but also through public development banks. I do believe that agri-PDBs, and IFAD is leading a platform of 140 agri-PDBs in the world, are also another of the big actors in local players that we can really mobilize to then, once that's organized, to scale up and to that financing to these small-scale farmers. Because frankly, there's enough financing for the large agri-PDBs, even for the large agri-food companies, even in Africa, on land. What we are missing is just that rural SMEs, which many times they fail not because they don't have the ideas, but they fail because they are fragmented, they are underfinanced, and they're perceived as risky. So those are the things that we need to tackle.
Okay. Alvaro, thank you very much for that. Thank you. Fascinating to learn all those factors. I'm going to come to you, Dennis, because you work in a pretty unique environment, let's say that. And so I'd like to bring your expertise to this idea that when agribusiness, we know it's, you know, the source of investment and employment, potential employment is there. But when it moves into a frontier market, okay, how do you separate investment that you know is going to transform the area and local economies and investment that is just going to extract value and not put anything back? How do you make sure that doesn't happen?
Well, thank you for the invitation. I'd like to bring a few of the ingredients that have made Brazilian agribusiness grow, and it's now happening as well in the Brazilian Amazon, which is a laggard within Brazil. So one of the things that made Brazil, I think, a leader in agribusiness is understanding that farmers are businessmen. Farmers are entrepreneurs, and they're not only growing a crop, they're growing a business. And when you're growing a business, you look at so many more things than when you're just farming. And so Brazil has an institution called SEBRAE, which trains entrepreneurs, and it used to focus on urban entrepreneurs. That used to be a mistake. I think we learned from it, and now farmers are treated as entrepreneurs. And that makes them evolve through the learning curve. And what Brazil has found is that farmers are entrepreneurs, but they are much more risk averse than other entrepreneurs. That they have fewer options. If you're in a city, you can find a job if you don't succeed. If you're in farming, you don't have the option of failing. So you need predictability, and Brazil has been able to create the business environment that allows the farmers to evolve and not to take risk, but to behave in the way that is expected. So, for example, we used to do a lot of cattle breeding, low productivity cattle breeding. And of course, that's connected to deforestation in the Amazon, which is a whole different chapter. But we want them to grow crops, and we want them to do agroforestry. But for them to do that, they need a lot of support. So I'll bring a few examples. One of them is an institution called Embrapa, which is a science and technology transfer institution that provides, for example, experimental farms. Farmers need to see, what good crops look like. And if you don't have examples, if you don't have something to point to, if you don't have a neighbor who's doing really well, they're not going to take the risk. So Embrapa provides experimental farms around the country, and then private businesses take from there. So our business, for example, we take from Embrapa and we bring these best practices to other places. Another example is price guarantees and purchasing guarantees. So farmers, the cattle breeding is easy because cows are cash and they can be consumed in the local market or exported. Crops are different. Crops have limited options. So you need the price guarantees that you won't have to deal with international markets and prices changing all the time. A good example is cocoa recently. Of course, cocoa is grown in Africa, but the prices go up, the prices go down. It's been crazy over the last few years. Farmers can't handle that. And lastly, financing and insurance. So if you want a farmer to take a risk, for example, plant cocoa. Cocoa takes like 3 or 4 years to grow. And if the plants die halfway, that's the end of it. So farmers will naturally revert to cattle breeding in the Amazon. But if you have insurance and if you have long-term financing, then it becomes an option. Lastly, I just want to point, as growing a business, one of the things that has changed is AI adoption. And businessmen of all sorts, urban and rural, need to focus on AI adoption because it's the place where we have found the greatest productivity gains. And each person needs to figure out for themselves how it's useful, but they have to be exposed and they have to learn from it.
Okay. Fascinating, and you've brought up a couple of things. I mean, digital, we heard, I think Ajay earlier this year said that digital is the glue to all of this. And when we talk about AI, we'll talk about this in energy. We need the energy to power the AI. So we need to, sort out the energy first on the continent. Before we go, I'm going to give you a minute each, if I could, please. If you had the authority to change one thing tomorrow that would unlock millions of jobs across Africa, what would you change first, Minister, with the experience you've had in your country? You have 1 minute.
Yeah. What I will change is how to make sure farmers get access to finance. Because when finance is available at scale, farmers will want to invest in technology. And processors will upgrade their equipment and value chains deepen, and the jobs will follow. Jobs, follow capital, and capital follow credible institutions. So once you fortify your institutions, you turbocharge your systems, the jobs will flow.
Mr. Lario, one thing. Tomorrow.
I would say this is going to sound like a commonplace, but there's no silver bullet because actually food systems relate to infrastructure, relate to energy, relate to agriculture, relate to many different sectors together. And it's important to understand, even in Brazil, if you go to the south, there's lots of large agribusiness who do great. Where we operate is the northeast, where all the poverty is. We have programs actually on dairy value chains, extremely complicated, with public purchases, which relates to financing, to climate adaptation, to water. I think the complexity is there. So I would not be able to do so, but clearly I would say and following perhaps on the presentation from Paschal and points from Ajay, I think the commitment from the government to really work together on this as a priority is very important, and we're seeing it in Africa, that after the global shocks, many leaders are starting to understand food security as national security, just as we do here in Europe or in the US. So that's changing. I think that commitment to address it as one government is very important.
Dennis, what would unlock those jobs in your experience?
I think there's so many opportunities.
What's your number one? Yes.
If I have to pick one that's related to AI adoption.
Fascinating.
So our business, for example, we have 600 licenses of paid ChatGPT. I consider that the cheapest investment I have ever made. We've been doing it for 2 years, and the productivity it has unlocked in a few people, not all, has been extraordinary. I've lost many of these people because now they know how productive they can be. But I think this is the greatest productivity opportunity we see in the world now. It includes the poorest areas. This is not a developed country issue. And we have been lethargic in adopting AI, I think, all across the developing world.
You've taken us very nicely onto our next conversation, but I can see AI and unlocking jobs on the African continent as another conference. But gentlemen, thank you so much, Minister Alvaro and Dennis. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen.
I'll be to Mbrapa.
Yeah.
That was all about confidence. But as we alluded to there, what about capability? No company, no firm is going to scale without power. No nation is going to develop without the infrastructure. But what is the reality of living within that energy gap? We all know about it. Africa has an energy gap. What is it like? Well, let's take a look at the example of Chad. Thank you.
Maintenant, par exemple, quand on vient de recevoir ce matériel, ça nous aide à faire des activités à compter de 19h à 20h, 20h jusqu'à 22h ou 23h. Et nous aimerions nous éteindre où on laisse jusqu'à l'aube.
Quel doit utiliser pétrole pétrole machine la denga datel di comme torche la torche gu pile mundane bol wala bol dunda saran do munda tonda gudo atel do mara na bananda ji mosh karala ndu pile andu pile
torgi dinga ne la shi manya yele ji shinga lo na ji shi je lije dongo da totun da lije do kara bol ngan ci je kara daw tura gum bederum
woto lo nda torche shi bele dondo je ne abo pergodo tonda dondo ne lato asa sendije super nda tonda to dondo ne super lato.
Grâce à cette lampe que mon activités ça marche. Avant c'est trop, c'est 20 000 par jour, mais pour le moment ça augmente. Ici c'est 30 000.
Quel est le dépassé? Je cabine de néjé ma charger téléphone nam jé néjé loni. Na be da mam sikile ma tranquille ma charger téléphone ma néjé dom nang be godulum. Dans un mois de néjé da ma dépassé plus de 3 000 4 000 ba charger téléphone nam daga.
Panu be ngunu. Par la karo seba no mbia panu be la samnya. Ni ku jele mukara. Nya ma protéger le ma wono. Bu su mondo de pil don do le ngum. Ba tele ba yam dogo du kulje de morgu boraje ba dar ki baton da de wiyo nya merci nya.
Avec l'arrivée de cette énergie-là, la fréquentation a augmenté. Parce que dans la nuit, tu vois, le centre est éclairé et ça a beaucoup attiré également les malades. Dans d'autres centres même, ils sont obligés de venir vers nous parce que notre centre est bien éclairé.
Avant, lorsque nous n'avons pas la lumière, nous faisons l'accouchement avec la lampe torche.
Ces panneaux solaires-là, vraiment, ça nous aide, ça nous donne encore beaucoup de courage.
ça nous permettra également de faire certaines révisions pendant la nuit avec nos élèves. Si je désire deux ou trois élèves qui ne connaissent pas bien écrire, je les rappelle de venir souvent dans la nuit pour qu'ils puissent maîtriser avant qu'on évolue.
Tant que quelqu'un prend au dos les dindonnes da d'auver da d'aumaroi, parce que pour godo, mais à ça que là si que pour ne da d'auda l'ondula tel l'indonne gugu.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, this is all about energy. This is about capability. And by capability, I'm talking about physical and human. We heard it described earlier. Build it, staff it, sustain it. I'm going to bring my panelists straight up. We are running a tight ship in the latter part of this session. So please welcome to the stage Mr. James Mwangi, Group Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Equity Group Holdings PLC. Welcome. Nonkululeko Nyembezi is Chairperson of Standard Bank Group. Mr. Claudio Desclazzi is the Chief Executive Officer of ENI. And Dr. Sidita, President of the African Development Bank Group. A round of applause for my panelists, please. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Mwangi. You sit quite close to entrepreneurs and small businesses across Africa. I mean, you achieved something brilliant, a small building society to this massive entity. What is the biggest reason that infrastructure investments don't lead to the jobs?
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, and I deeply appreciate the invitation. When you look at enterprises and infrastructure, the construct of infrastructure is systems, policies, normally other government policy. The enterprise is by private sector. And particularly when you talk about energy infrastructure, there is always a perception that gigawatts of power generated is equal to jobs created. And that is where the problem is, because power only contributes to job creation if it's connected to the enterprise that might be in a rural area. So where power is generated, where power is consumed, there are two different places. What is the entrepreneur who creates the jobs is looking for? Is looking for reliable, dependable infrastructure. Power that is clean, power that can be relied on. Is looking for affordable power, power that really retains them as competitive in the marketplace because they are producing for the market. So he will not create jobs if he's not assured that the power will be connected. He will not even build the factory until he's aware that power will be, in a predictable way, be delivered at a certain level. And then the most important thing is that that entrepreneur will also require to hire people with the skills that will allow connectivity and maintenance. And that skills gap, particularly in rural areas, always are lacking.
Okay.
And lastly is the biggest challenge with us bankers.
Okay.
Providing finances to those enterprises.
Okay.
When power becomes available, entrepreneurs want to scale up their businesses and employ more. But banks don't provide long-term capital.
Mr. Mwangi, I'm so sorry. I just need to get to all my panelists. Thank you very much for that. Ms. Nyembezi, I want to come to you because I want specific examples because they are the best way to illustrate a point. Could you share your experience with Standard Bank?
I'm going to decide whether to speak quickly or
We have about that much time.
Two examples. So I come from South Africa, a country that has really wrestled with lack of electricity for over 10 years. Don't ask me why, but 10 years is what it took us to fix
our power issues fixed today, but in that time, the economy and the growth in that economy virtually collapsed. What did we see? We saw a troubled employment, or rather, should I say, unemployment situation get much, much worse. From the 20-something%, which was already very, very high unemployment rate, all the way up to around 33%. So we know that without power at a national systemic level, you have a problem. So I think that is your proof point. What happens at the other end of that power generation? Well, we know what doesn't happen is that you don't create jobs. Go to the other end of the spectrum. Standard Bank is one of the funders to a very large LNG project in Mozambique, one of the largest, as a matter of fact, on the African continent, 20 billion plus project. I want to quote you some of the stats that we found before we decided to fund this project, especially in the current environment, and looked at what its job creation potential could be. And here are the numbers, because I think they might surprise you. We found that it would create 1,300 permanent jobs, minimum. We always think these are very, very transient jobs, that they're finished when the project is finished. We found actually there was that number, which in a country of the size of Mozambique is pretty dramatic. We found there'd be 20,000 construction jobs during the period over which this job would be getting constructed. And we found 300,000 indirect jobs throughout the economy of that country, which for Mozambique was roughly equivalent to 30% of all formal jobs. And we found that actually the other knock-on impacts, which we couldn't quantify, that ran through from your extra houses and schools and clinics, etc., that would percolate through the economy. So that is just the construction, never mind what happens when you get to steady state. Do they have the skills? Of course not. It makes it really, really difficult to do these jobs in the outlying areas of the African continent, such as you saw in Chad. But it can be done because the company that comes in needs to be very clear about using local SMEs, using local employment hard, but the opposite is even harder.
Thank you very much. I'm going to talk about building those relationships. And I know many of you are going to have so many questions after you've just heard what Mbesi's had to say. Please grab her at the end, and please grab all our panelists and have those conversations. But can I come to you, Claudio? You've had success in building and sustaining relationships on the African continent. What was the secret to that, please? What are the fundamentals?
The fundamentals, I think that you have to take risks to be trustable. So it's not easy to have financing in Africa to develop new projects. So what we did, I think, looking at 25 years ago, is to put our equity. So we took a risk. In which area? In gas. You have to think that now gas is very popular, but before gas was a risk. When you drill a well and you find gas, that was practically a dry well, because in Africa there is no domestic market, there is no power plant, and before we didn't have LNG. So what we did in, I think, beginning 2000 is to build on the gas for domestic development electricity. So we invest more than 2.5 billion Nigerian Congo to build power plant and to deliver gas to the domestic to access to energy. So that was an incredible risk, because that was done for the countries. Still now we don't have recovered all the money we put in these initiatives, but clearly this creates a legacy, a trust that allows us to build a different kind of relationship. That has been done everywhere, because 85% of the gas that we discover in Africa has been invested for domestic utilization. So for farms, for agriculture, a lot of agriculture, and for chemicals, refineries, and for civilian utilization. So that is a way. We are the only company So all the other company then discover gas, but for export, and we decide to invest just in the domestic market. So that creates a different trust. So that is an example, but I think that if you are in a developing country, you have to take a risk. So you have to share. You have to work with a double flag. So with the flag of the country as well, not just with yours. So I think that is one. It's not a secret, because taking a risk is not a secret. You have to take the risk, but it's one of the issues that we have to face when you work in Africa. I lived more than 18 years in Africa. I'm also Congolese as passport, so I know very well what I'm talking about. And I think it's not easy to solve the problem. Financing is not the solution. Charity is not the solution.
Claudia, thank you very much. 18 years, I'm jealous. Dr. Tar, I'm going to come to you, please. Infrastructure and energy investments. When you look through the portfolio and you decide where you're going to put your money, what is it you're looking for? And you know that it is going to catalyse private capital, but also those jobs. What are the characteristics that you're scanning through the document and you go, yes, no, 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 yes?
Without no hesitation,
energy.
As you know, Africa has 600 million people who have no access to energy, but also the lack of energy is impeding the development of all of the sectors. We were talking about agriculture. Do you know that in many African countries, 80% of the agricultural production is lost because of the lack of cold storage and cold facilities? So energy is key, and this is why Mission 300, which is an initiative with the World Bank, African Development Bank, and many other players, and we are happy that also Italy through Mattei Plan and the Rome process is supporting this initiative, is meant to provide 300 million African with electricity by 2030. And so far, Ajay may have an update on the figures, more than 45 million Africans have received electricity thanks to this initiative, and more than 30 countries have signed a compact with this initiative. So, to give you some examples, for instance, supporting countries to do the right reform, to set up the legal, institutional, and regulatory framework has helped to develop many IPPs in Africa. So private sector has invested in generation. Now we are moving to transmission, and I'm happy to report that Africa 50, which is one of the affiliate of African Development Bank, has recently signed with the Kenya government one of the first transmission, private sector-led transmission line in Africa, and many other countries are moving to also have transmission done by the private sector. Okay. So what is important today is not only to rely on the public capital, but to bring the private capital to invest in energy. And we do believe that with Mission 300 and with the support of Mattei Plan, we will be able to achieve our targets.
I want to thank my panel very, very much, because I had to do this so quickly. And the reason, as I'm sure you're aware, there is a lot of conflict and war, and the Prime Minister wanted to be here today. We've had to juggle her schedule around, but she is here. We just need to set up something for her. So thank you so much for keeping to time, and thank you for all your contributions. Dr. Mwangi, Ms. Mbezi, Mr. Descalzi, and Dr. Tar. Okay. We are going to take you to Sierra Leone, ladies and gentlemen. Please don't move. Prime Minister Meloni is on her way. We're just setting up. But in the meantime, the view from Sierra Leone. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Mina Gloria Kariatu Kamara. Mina 23 years. I get one pikin with my sister, where I support to just work here where they do. So I not been sabi out in the plant here, I not be sabi out in the water, I not be sabi out in the pump chemical. I don't learn a lot of that.
I'm born on a farm in Belgium. My father was a farmer. My grandfather was a farmer. 3.5 years ago, I had a phone from IFC if I could come to Sierra Leone for a few days to see if it is possible to grow onions in this country.
The farm means more to PC Holdings than just profit making. It demonstrates our willingness to go into sustainable strategies that create jobs, completes the value chain from farming to the upmarket. So it is critical for PC Holdings to have industries that produce and seed and grow things in Sierra Leone. The challenge has been serious, but the results have been sweet as well, to see what effect it has on people's lives.
We not been get hospitality facility, but to go PC we don't get hospital. Now we the woman there who they go for go born, we they able get appetite for go born. We they go there then go give you free medical. Then if you need to chook yourself now, then they go give free medical.
This is spoiled, you see. If you leave the skin on it, it will continue to spoil. I learned about PC agriculture during 2023 through the Ministry of Agriculture. There are plenty female agronomists, but it is difficult for some to leave their comfort zone and come to this remote area.
Augusta has never dealt with fertilization formula before. When we started, it was new to her. Now she trains other people in terms of the fertilization mix and administering the fertilizer.
I have passion for agriculture. Being in PC agriculture expand my knowledge and makes me grounded more in my area.
The goal from the beginning, in fact, is that we can come to a point that a farm can produce enough onions for the market in Sierra Leone. That Sierra Leone and not depend anymore for onions from outside. It was very difficult in the beginning, and it is still difficult. But we arrive. We see now that it is possible to do onions on a great scale with good quality and good yield.
The effect on people is huge. You build in industries in areas where nobody was there before. You change in people's lives in the villages, for example. You reducing prices on the value chain. The consumer is buying the product at cheaper cost in itself, especially in the cost of living and challenges that are going on around the world. It's very refreshing that you can see agribusiness as the industry that could transform Sierra Leone, as it has done in other countries.
Through this work, I go get way for food medication.
All the workers here, they are community people. So immediately you have a good rapport with any one of them, then you are good with the entire community.
The consumption from onions in Sierra Leone is about 50,000 tons. Yeah, it's a lot of onions, of course, but you can produce it.
This is a very important moment for us in itself on the upscale, and the market is there, the market is waiting. We have to make sure we produce quality onions in a mechanized manner while creating jobs, and more importantly, building capacity, transferring capacity from the experts to the locals, make sure training and development is taking place on a regular basis, and we'll take the community with us.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, thank you very much indeed. And so to our special guest to close proceedings for us, a leader who has essentially placed growth, stability, but also partnership at the centre of her national strategy with Africa and the Global South. I give you the Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, Giorgia Meloni. Welcome to the stage. The floor is yours.
Well, good evening, Governor Panetta, President Banga, President Shanmugaratnam, authorities. Well, despite the difficult days we are facing, I didn't want to miss the opportunity to close this debate, dedicated to a topic that I consider crucial, not only for the future of Africa, but for the future of the entire Europe, which is the construction of the physical and intangible infrastructure that makes growth, enterprise, and employment possible. The title of this event, Laying the Groundwork for Jobs, recalls a simple yet incredibly often forgotten truth, that jobs are not created, let's say, by a simple decree. They are created where favorable conditions exist, where there is physical and digital infrastructure, reliable energy, trained human capital, solid institutions, clear rules, and access to finance. It is this simple premise that drives Italy's actions, both at home and obviously internationally, particularly with regard to the African continent. We have implemented this through the Mattei Plan, an investment program in African countries that outlines a strategy of cooperation, but cooperation among equals, built on a clear vision to help create the structural conditions for the development of production chains, strong local businesses, and stable and dignified employment in African nations, so that Africa can grow and prosper by processing its resources, cultivating its land, and making the most of its human capital. In this process, collaboration with the World Bank has been and continues to be increasingly central. With President Banga, whom I really would like to sincerely thank for his clarity and readiness in working together, we've engaged in an intense and concrete dialogue from the outset. We share a fundamental approach to this common goal, putting the private sector at the center of development, mobilizing capital, reducing investment risk, and strengthening the institutional capacity of partner nations. The World Bank is a key player in building business-friendly environments, regulatory reform, and strengthening economic institutions. And the Italian government, through the Mattei Plan, is a partner in this mission, wants to be a partner in this mission. One of the most concrete signs of this collaboration in recent months has been the opening of the International Finance Corporation office in Rome. The permanent presence of the International Finance Corporation in our capital is not merely symbolic. It is a strategic choice. It means creating an operational bridge between the Italian production system, African markets, and the financial instruments of the World Bank Group. It means facilitating encounters between companies, investors, and bankable projects. It means strengthening the ability to mobilize private capital towards initiatives with a high impact on employment. We want Rome to become a European hub for investments in Africa, a place where the public and private sectors work together to turn good ideas into jobs. Because for us, again, jobs are key. Decent, stable, quality jobs. Jobs that enable young Africans to build their future in their own homeland. Africa is the youngest continent in the world, with 60% of its population under the age of 25. Every year, millions of young people enter the labor market. If we do not create adequate opportunities, there is obviously a risk of exclusion, instability, and forced migration. But if we invest seriously in energy, infrastructure, agriculture, and technical and vocational training, we can transform the demographic dynamic into an extraordinary lever for development. The Mattei Plan focuses precisely on these strategic areas. First, energy. As Enrico Mattei said, there is no work without business, there is no business without energy. Investing in networks, production capacity, and renewable sources means creating jobs immediately and at the same time enabling the growth of entire supply chains. We are at the forefront of this effort with the World Bank through the Mission 300 project, which aims to reach over 300 million African citizens by 2030 with new electricity infrastructures. Second, agriculture. Although Africa has a very large share of the planet's arable land, it still imports a significant proportion of its food. Improving agricultural productivity, developing local processing, and strengthening value chains means generating millions of jobs, especially for young people and women. Third, training and skills. Physical infrastructure must go hand in hand with human capital infrastructure. To this end, the Italian government is working on technical and vocational training programs in collaboration with local businesses and institutions to align the skills of young people with the real needs of the markets. One example is the commitment to establish Pan-African training centers for agriculture and water resource use in Algeria and Tunisia, and for training in renewable energy in Morocco. Fourth, regulatory environment and access to finance. Here, once again, collaboration with the World Bank is essential. Reforms that simplify procedures, strengthen legal certainty, combat corruption, and improve access to the credit for SMEs are essential conditions for attracting large-scale investments. In essence, we believe that the effectiveness of cooperation is measured not by the good intentions, but by the concrete results it achieves in terms of jobs created, businesses supported, and investments mobilized. This is our approach, and we believe it should also be the approach that Europe and the West take towards Africa. Less fragmentation, more coordination, less rhetoric, more construction sites, fewer promises, more innovative and concrete financial instruments, less charity, more development. The collaboration with the World Bank and the IFC shows that it is possible to create systems. Pooling public resources, technical expertise, and private capital to reduce perceived risk and increase real impact. And our method is not based on the arrogance of those who impose pre-established models from above, regardless of the demands of African people, but rather by sharing solutions and the way to implement those solutions. This is the model we are following, the path we are taking, to build partnerships based on mutual respect, transparency, and shared responsibility in a win-win approach. Because when a young African finds employment and can choose to contribute to the land where he was born and raised, we are not only helping the development of a nation, we are strengthening stability, we are combating the causes of forced migration, we are imagining a more balanced relationship between Africa and Europe, we are investing in the common future of our societies. And it is a model that is attracting interest and increasing involvement, as demonstrated recently by the success of the Italy-Africa summit in Addis Ababa. But our work has only just begun. We intend to continue it with even with greater effectiveness, involving more and more nations, speeding up the implementation of projects, and further strengthening multilateral financial leverage. Today, the Mattei Plan directly involves 14 African nations, and in 2026, we will extend our strategy to 4 more: the Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwanda, Gabon, and Zambia. We know It is a demanding challenge, but we are not lacking in determination. Above all, we know that on this ambitious journey, we can always count on the concrete collaboration of the World Bank, which has embraced our vision from the outset and has never failed to provide its valuable contribution. So thank you again, President Banga, for the work done so far, but moreover, for the work we will do together in the future. Thank you all.
Prime Minister Meloni, thank you very much indeed. It's not often I hear the country of my birth, Zambia, mentioned, so thank you, molte grazie. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been an absolute honour, and again we thank the Prime Minister for rushing over to conclude proceedings today, and for all our distinguished guests, our esteemed panellists, and our friends that have joined us in this room and online. A very good evening to you. Goodbye. Thank you.